perhaps really we shouldn't even vote in the first place. Must just allow the markets to do as they please. We cannot have white leadership in South Africa in 2024. And I say white people as a group must relinquish that which makes them white. Now you have white privilege and white supremacy in government.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. Today, I'm really glad to be joined by someone whose thought and writing has shot to the top of many, many minds in South African legal and political thought. Dr. Ntando Sindane, thank you for joining us. You are a lecturer in the Department of Public Law and Jurisprudence at UWC and celebrity academic now.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm not so sure about celebrity academic.
No, it's funny. In academia, the more public recognition you get, the more suddenly people seem to think your thought is superficial. So one needs to avoid the tag of celebrity academic at all costs.
Yeah, definitely. Also being a celebrity, I think when we're academics, we work with longevity.
Yeah.
You want to be there for a very long time. You want to think and produce thought.
Yeah.
So celebrities come and go. So that's. But if I'm called a celebrity academic, I accept it.
Yeah. No, people have put you there, so there's nothing you can do now.
Yeah.
No, Doc, thank you for joining us. You know, on this channel, we've had a number of interesting discussions around the intersection of law, the Constitution, history, and politics. And we're really glad that you can join us to intervene on those debates. How do you react to and make sense of the new ANC-DA coalition government? And what do you think it means for South Africa?
Well, I react to it with profound sadness. Precisely because of who we are as a country, but also because of who the Democratic Alliance are and what they represent. And who are they? They are a white-led organization. And what do they represent? They represent the interests of whiteness, white people, and the bourgeois class or the propertied class or the business people. So for me, I approach this with profound sadness because I don't think this is what Steve Biko died for. I don't think that this is what Mandela fought for. And also, I think the results of the elections themselves were a move towards the left. You know, if we analyze the results of the election, they are the people, the voice of the people is a move towards the left. So this DA-ANC coalition that they call the Government of National Unity is a move towards the right, you know. And what do I say people are saying the left? Because the politics of the African National Congress are politics of the center. So if the African National Congress loses support and is below 50 and is almost below 40, that is a rejection of center politics, you know. The Democratic Alliance itself is not growing. It's reached its ceiling. Who are the parties that have done extremely well? Umkhonto Sizwe Party, you know. The EFF might have slightly decreased, but it's not a rejection, you know. So the EFF remain with their base intact, and that base is not to be judged from 2021 or 2019, but from 2014. But why also is the profound sadness on my part? What I call the tyranny of the markets. You know, so I invoke Biko, but I also invoke Mandela. And President Mandela, with all the criticism leveled against him, was somebody who believed in democracy. And what is democracy? Ntando yenengi. Now, people talk about the outcome of the elections. But they don't talk about how in the lead up to the elections, after the elections were declared, you had the markets saying quite clearly what outcome they want.
Yeah.
And the markets is a group of 3 or 4 families, a few individuals in those families. And in the coalition discussions, it is the views of those few white families that have prevailed. So a friend of mine says, we perhaps really we shouldn't even vote in the first place. Must just allow the markets to do as they please. Because we have voted, we have given a mandate to those people whom we voted for. And at the end of the day, it's the markets and the views of the markets, the views of those few families that prevail. And for me, that is a moment of profound sadness. We can talk about the DA being white as a problem. I don't want to mince my words. We cannot have white leadership in South Africa in 2024. We can't.
What do you think it means? Because I'm also trying to make sense of this. White people have colonized and governed for themselves South Africa for centuries, and we come out of that moment in our history with all its imperfections in 1994. At the very least, I think we can agree that the ANC held a tremendous amount of political power and at least purported to put transformation and the interests of the black majority at its center. Whether it did that or not, well, I've argued very forcefully it failed, but at least it tried to pretend that's what it was about. We now have a party, the DA, which emerges from a history within apartheid where it's not always clear that it was, as it presents itself, this opposition force, right? Certainly it didn't go to the kind of radical length that we would expect a political movement to go against something as evil as apartheid. It merges in some ways with remnants of the National Party. And now it has enough power to have a say at the highest level of government. Historically speaking, we probably haven't reckoned with what that actually means.
No, I have white colleagues, some of whom are my friends. And I say to them that Steve Biko is probably very important for this moment than any other revolutionary scholar or philosopher. Because one of the things that Steve Biko tells us, particularly about the DA, because you'll remember during apartheid, you had the conservatives.
Sure.
And then you had the liberals. And the liberals always behaved as if they are the better whites, that they are with black people. But Steve Biko teaches us that this liberal grouping of white people were not any better than conservatives. They wanted to have relationships with us as black people at an individual level, but fundamentally were not opposed to a system of apartheid and a system of whiteness. Now, when these white friends or colleagues ask me, what is it that they should do? And I say, white people as a group must relinquish that which makes them white. So they must commit epistemic and ontological suicide. What makes white people to be white in post-apartheid South Africa? White privilege, white supremacy. Now, until white people amongst themselves as a group, those who say they are progressive whites, until they relinquish white privilege and white supremacy, they remain white people. And that is what the Democratic Alliance represents, white people and whiteness. And the Democratic Alliance is far from dealing with these questions because in their own discourse, they deny that race is an issue. You know, Mmusi Maimane had a moment when he said, if you don't see that I'm black, then you don't see me at all.
Yeah.
You know, so they are far from dealing with that. They are far from relinquishing white privilege and white supremacy. And I say it to my students all the time. The fact that black people are born in a specific village or a specific township is not of their own choosing. It's not because God loved or hates them, you know. It's because of the operative, the institutional, the systemic function of white privilege and white supremacy.
Absolutely.
Now you have white privilege and white supremacy in government. Imagine how throttling that. It's very scary. A black person who is not scared this morning after the DA has entered into a coalition must wake up and smell the coffee while living in precarious times. You know, I'll give you a very bland example. The new Deputy Speaker of Parliament,
Lottered.
Dr. Anneli Lottered. The DA, if they had a sense of self-contradiction, were not going to present her name ahead of, for example, somebody like Lesego Kgobe. If you put Lesego here and you put Lottered here, let's say for a moment we forget that the one is black and the one is white. Check the opportunities that the two of them have had. Lottered studied up to a PhD, you know. After the PhD, got another degree in a different discipline, has been an academic. If you check the CVs of the two, it's very easy to tell that the white woman got more opportunities than the black woman. Now, if you had a Democratic Alliance that was able to contradict itself, that was able to introspect, you know, they would have put up a black woman there. But the robustness of whiteness doesn't allow them. You know, we are Marxists, we are decolonial scholars, so everything that we say is rooted in scholarly literature and in science. And science wants us to read history. You see the position where Lesego is in currently. It's a position where other black leaders of the DA were. And today they are not there. The likes of Kekana, you know, Mmusi Maimane, Lindiwe Mazibuko, and others. Because it is a party that does not want to relinquish that which makes them white. So whiteness in South Africa and white people are a problem.
It's interesting to me, and you're an important constitutional scholar at the moment, the way that the broader political situation, which we've touched on, has invoked the Constitution at different times in this election cycle in ways that sadly the mainstream media has just been unable to really grapple with. And the Constitution generally in mainstream conversations, particularly in commercial media, is invoked as this myth that must be defended at all costs. When you actually ask what the content of the Constitution is, no one seems to know, but whatever it is, it must be defended.
They will be done.
Yes, yeah, exactly. How do you understand and interpret the ways that the Constitution has been invoked in this election from lots of different perspectives? It's been invoked from social conservative perspectives on the one hand, and from progressive perspectives. But those critiques have all been lumped into one, quote, anti-constitutionalist position.
Look, there are four dominant positions as regards the Constitution. But maybe before I just briefly go through them, there's a scholar called Linda Coley. Linda Coley says that a constitution is a story. It tells the story of a people and a time. That's Linda Coley. I'll share the title of the book with you when I remember it. But
Sure. We'll put it in the description.
now, Linda Coley, having said that, one of the questions that we then need to ask is, what story is the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa telling about the people of South Africa? So that is where I want us to begin. But there are four positions. You have denialists, you have triumphalists, you have skeptics, and you have abolitionists. Now, denialists are those who, in the main, are not in academia, but are mainly practitioners of the law. Your judges, your advocates, your attorneys.
Right.
And how do they deny the Constitution? So most of them, when they present their cases in court or when judges write their judgments, have a habit of denying the constitutional moment as a moment. So what do I mean by this? They think of the Constitution as something that is only applicable to public law. So if a court is hearing an insurance law dispute,
Sure.
or intellectual property law dispute,
Contractual.
they have a habit of denying the Constitution, to say,
Sure.
we had common law and common law could cover this. We have legislation and legislation. This is not in the sense of the principle of subsidiarity, which is something else, but a complete denial and avoidance of the Constitution.
Sure.
Then you have triumphalists, which are very popular in academia, but also amongst people who are pseudo-academics who make a academic commentary without a commitment to academic rigor. These are the people who say, this is the best constitution in the world.
Yeah.
It should be defended. Our constitution is the alpha and omega, the author and the finisher of our faith as a country. And if you dare criticize the constitution, you are a heretic.
Yeah.
You are uncivilized. You are a barbarian. You are unrefined. You can't think. Or they will even say you are a criminal. When you criticize the constitution, you want to criticize the constitution because you want to steal, you want to loot, So those are triumphalists. They think very highly of the constitution. Then you have skeptics. Skeptics are also mainly found amongst academics.
Sure.
They criticize an overly optimistic handling of the Constitution, and they are aware that the Constitution may have weaknesses.
Yeah.
But they say we must be wary not to be trigger happy to amend the Constitution. And they are also against a complete doing away with the Constitution. So those are skeptics.
Yeah, sure.
Then we have the last group, abolitionists. Abolitionists are those who address the political questions that define the Constitution. I have written somewhere that there are two types of politics in the Constitution. Politics with the capital P and politics with the small p.
Sure.
So abolitionists say we must ask and focus on the political questions that define the Constitution. I'll get into that later. But this grouping says that the amongst other things, they say a lot of things, but amongst other things, they say that the Constitution is not a product of the people. It is rather a product of elite pacts between white people and elite black people. And that this Constitution, therefore, does not respond to the fundamental questions or the fundamental desires and sensitivities of the people.
Yeah.
You know, they make other critiques, of course, of the Constitution, and conclude at saying that perhaps the Constitution needs to be done away with so that we can rethink a completely new polity. Now, to respond to your question, you must stop me when I give long-winded responses.
No, not at all. This is the place for long-winded responses, and our audience is also, appreciative of those who are able to expand. So feel free.
I'm sure nginguthisha.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's just might as well just turn it into a lecture.
So now, to respond to your question, the triumphalists are listened to by the media, the white-owned media.
Sure.
So much so that when you critique the Constitution, they are very quick to label you all the things that I've said, bad things, and they would say, for example, Umkhonto weSizwe is anti-constitutional, and we need to guard against Umkhonto weSizwe. In fact, they say Umkhonto weSizwe presents a danger to society. John Steenhuisen says we can't enter into a coalition with the EFF because the EFF is anti-constitutional. So there's this scarecrow. So the Constitution is God, and anybody who criticizes the Constitution is the devil. Now, the problem about triumphalists, two problems. They are anti-intellectual because they refuse to engage, for instance, abolitionist scholarly and the critique that abolitionists make. But the second one is that they are propagandistic in their approach. I don't know if that's an English word. Propagandistic. If it doesn't exist,
very good one.
I've coined it. But they believe in lies to advance their point. For example, the manifesto of the Economic Freedom Fighters has a section on constitutional design and democratic participation. And the very last sentence, though they put points there, the very last sentence of that part of the manifesto says the EFF believes and affirms constitutional supremacy. So they may have said we would want to amend this part and amend that part, want to remove provinces because we don't think provinces are effective, and those things require constitutional amendment. But at the very end, at the heart of what the EFF says, it says it believes in the Constitution.
Yeah.
John Steenhuisen speaks to your colleagues in the media and podcasters and says the EFF is anti-constitutional.
And it's repeated in all kinds of publications. And
none of your colleagues, zero, none of them challenge John Steenhuisen and say, but John or Helen, maybe John has intellectual disabilities. Maybe let's say Helen. If that's out of order, you'll cut it out.
No, you're out of order.
But let's say Helen Zille. When she says those lies, none of your colleagues in the media, I become frustrated sometimes. My partner knows this. I sometimes switch off the TV and say, let's just watch Netflix. Because none of your colleagues say, but John, the EFF is clear on this. And even Umkhonto weSizwe party.
How do you deal with that? Because there is a more strident critique of the Constitution from Umkhonto weSizwe than there is in the EFF. By the way, just while we're on this, the collapsing of the EFF and Umkhonto weSizwe as if they're one thing, when they have clear differences, is also just a wonder to me.
It's nonsense.
Yeah, and reflects this racist attempt to say that anything black with any radical content at all must be collapsed into one thing which should be isolated and excluded. But let's not even.
No, definitely. And you are going to where I am going to say Helen and John are afraid to say to people, we don't like the EFF because of its leftist and socialist politics. They are afraid to say that this is an unashamedly black organization that defines itself as a black organization, and we don't want to work with that. So they use the scarecrow tactics of propaganda of anti-constitutionalism, which unfortunately some of our own black brothers in universities, brothers and sisters even, in universities, are repeating this propaganda of whiteness and the Democratic Alliance, and they want to put on a scholarly garb on it. It's up. There's no scholarly language to describe it except to say it's foolish nonsense, But I said at the beginning that the democratic outcomes are a move towards the left.
Sure.
And the very same triumphalists who claim to love the rule of law and democracy have exposed themselves to hate democratic outcomes. Whether or not you like Jacob Zuma, 45% of the province of KwaZulu-Natal voted for him. Whether you like Jacob Zuma or not, 14.6% of the national vote, he got it. Now you hear avowed pious constitutionalists saying in the lead up to the first sitting of parliament that Nkosi must be isolated. How dare you call yourself a constitutionalist, a lover of democracy, and on the same score you say 14.6% of the democratic outcome must be isolated. So this is...
They usually add the EFF to that, which is actually 25%.
You see? Yeah. So 25% is a large chunk of voters. The markets, the white families, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention their names, the Oppenheimers, the Minells, the Ruperts, went to the leadership of the Democratic Alliance and the leadership of the African National Congress and said, whatever you do, you must isolate these two black organizations. So it goes back to what I said. This moment is a moment of profound sadness. It's worse than Kaizer Chiefs not winning a trophy for 10 years.
I'm with you on that. So we agreed there. Let's go deeper into the Constitution itself. And where do you place yourself on the spectrum of the four positions you've seen, and why do you put yourself there? Because I agree with you. I think there's a very exhausting debate around the Constitution where people refuse to see any good faith in any other argument than the one they've chosen. But also, it seems to me that there are many echo chambers on many sides of the debate, and that true engagement, good faith engagement, has been lacking. So, what position have you generated in your legal scholarship around the Constitution, and what questions do you think we need to be asking of the Constitution in this moment of 30 years into, 30 years of democracy and since 1996 and the Constitution's inception?
Look, Sizwe, I think that these groups are non-exhaustive, they're not static.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my position, maybe what I must begin with, I believe in constitutionalism. I believe in constitutionalism, that we should have a constitution. So I may teach African customary law, I may be in my community engagement and stuff, I may be advising traditional leaders on African customary law issues and all of that.
Sure.
But I am at odds with anybody who says that we need to derive power from anything else other than a constitution. You know?
Sure.
But do I believe in this constitution? No. And I use the language of abolitionists because I think that language proffers to us a useful grammar to grapple with the calamity of a constitution that does not respond to the questions that it should respond to.
Sure.
Now, to the second part of your question. So now, I having answered the first part, I leave it to you and your viewers to locate me in one of the four. But I believe in constitutionalism.
Yeah.
And the language of abolitionists helps us to sharpen contradictions and to have the prerequisite grammar to grapple with the calamity of our times. Now, what are the questions that we should be?
I've discovered you're a triumphalist, skeptical abolitionist.
I'm a constitutional flip-flopper.
Exactly.
Now, I have, interestingly, just submitted a paper that is a response to Carl Clare and Dennis Davis.
Interesting. Yeah.
Where they presented a paper at UWC in 2023 celebrating 25 years of the Constitution.
Yeah, yeah.
And the title of their paper is Two Tiers to Constitutionalism. And mine is Decolonial Musings about Constitutionalism, the Constitution, and Democratic Futures. We hope it will get published.
Absolutely.
And it will be expressing some of the things I'm about to say now.
Sure.
Two things. So there are politics with the capital P and politics with the small p. And I don't have a problem with politics with the small p, but that is what people are mostly fixated about.
Yeah.
The small p are the things that appear in the text of the Constitution.
Sure.
The Bill of Rights, socio-economic rights, civil and political rights. I don't have a problem with that.
Sure.
In fact, I think they're very important. I think it's very important that with the transition of a government, you are not going to have anybody who's going to wake up one day and take teenage girls who are pregnant to an island, precisely because the Constitution would be the last bastion of defending teenage girls.
Yeah, sure.
You know, but that is not where I think the debate is. The debate is the capital P.
Right. Sure.
Now, the capital P, I said, are the political questions that sometimes are outside of the text. One of those is, what does it mean to be human? You know, we come from a colonial experience that dehumanized, colonized people, that had colonized people striving for freedom, protesting, you know, going underground, everything. At the end of striving for freedom, what we got was a constitution. And does the constitution then respond to the fundamental crime of dehumanization of colonized people? So this doesn't appear in the text.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that I say to Carl Clare and Dennis Davis, to say, when we debate about the Constitution, people are fixated on the small p and never the capital P.
Yeah, yeah.
The fundamental crime of colonialism was dispossession, not just land. Dispossession at material, social, and spiritual planes. The Constitution is very far from responding to that. So that's the first part.
Yeah.
The second,
and racial dispossession.
Racial dispossession.
Yeah. It wasn't as if everyone was dispossessed in the same way.
The second part is avowed constitutionalists and triumphalists are very quick to remind us that a constitution is put in place, and I said this at VETS, to do two things and two things only: to constitute power and to curtail state power. So for your viewers, you know this because you might have broached it in your book. To constitute power, so constitution is to say who does what in the state.
Sure.
And what are their powers.
Sure.
Secondly, how far can the state go in interfering with individual lives, also with, And I say that this conception of constitutionalism is inherently limited because we are existing in an abnormal society. So in a normal society, it's fine to have a constitution that just does these two things and ends there. So if in 1994, prior to 1994, there was no apartheid, there was no colonialism and all its atrocities, the raping, the killing, the maiming, dispossessing, displacing of colonized people who in the main are black people. If that had not happened, this constitution would have been perfect. But this constitution is a culmination of the abnormality of our society. So my argument is that we are duty-bound to imagine an abnormal constitution for an abnormal society. So if we can all be honest in our interlocutors, we would agree that there are some who think that South Africa as it is normal. And there are others who say it is not normal. And those who say it's normal want us to keep their constitution and constitutionalism as is. So I belong to those who say we have no business keeping their constitution and constitutionalism as is. Because we're an abnormal society, we need an abnormal constitution and abnormal constitutionalism. So that is the thesis of my argument. And I don't say it's new or novel or anything like that. I've already said that in arriving at this conclusion, I rely a lot on the scholarly language of abolitionists.
Absolutely. And I think the abolitionist tradition has made an important contribution to the debate about the Constitution as well. I'm tempted to agree with the view, and it's actually quite funny because I had Prof. Pierre de Vos here, and he said in this debate as well, the one critique he's most sympathetic to is the one that you just made, which is the Constitution doesn't narrate the historical dispossession strongly enough. And and you see that becomes a fundamental problem with the text, but also the subtext, because if you're not moving from the right departure point, then everything that comes later is fatally maybe flawed. If we cannot explicitly as a society say that this thing is broken, and we dance around it with niceties like the injustices of the past. As Prof. Matlingozi has pointed out, which injustices are we talking about? So if we cannot explicitly say that colonialism and apartheid were crimes against humanity that we must uproot in their entirety, that would be my opening line. Something like that, instead of we the people recognize the injustices of the past. I think that is something that we fail to do with this constitution.
Yeah, definitely. And who is the people? Because the entire system of colonialism and apartheid was based on the fact that some are people and others are not people. Walter Mayolo, of course, talking about a different context, but a colonial context, says when the colonizer came into contact, at the first of colonial contact, they said, you can't read and write in our alphabets, therefore you are not human. Other decolonial scholars, other prominent critical scholars who may not even call themselves decolonial scholars, Dladla, Ramos, Modiri, and many others, say it very clearly that the question of who is human is fundamental to the afterlife of apartheid, not the aftermath, afterlife of apartheid, which is an argument that you might like because it links with your book.
Absolutely.
That afterlife of apartheid fails to respond to who is human. And it's very deliberate from settlers and the white society, as Biko would call them. Because if we are to talk about who is human, we will have to go back to what are the things that humans need. What makes you human? Your knowledge is, where you live, the zone of your existence, and it would inevitably lead us to even the question of reparations,
Squarely.
Yes.
Yeah.
To say that which you have today is a product of theft. I say to a daughter of one of my white colleagues, young 20-year-old, and I say to her, what you and your family have today is a product of theft. And if you're going to sit with me here and we have dinner, I must be able to say that to you 20 times or more than that. And you on your own, when you go to bed, you must assess how that makes you feel. You must know that your presence in Africa is not, you are not touring. You are here to conquer, to kill, And the constitution that they celebrate disavows some of these things, colonial horrors. So if the constitution doesn't do that, then we are committed to justice, or are committed to what is right, then we have no business celebrating the constitution and this conception of constitutionalism, this limited, this refusal, people some black brothers and sisters want to tell us that we don't understand the constitution. We understand the constitution. We have 3 law degrees. We understand it very well. We are not criticizing what we don't know. We understand it and we hate it for what it is and what it stands for. And maybe to just put a full stop. This is a question that needs to be resolved. If it doesn't get resolved, then we're not going to be at peace as a country. We're not at ease right now. We're not going to be at peace. Even intellectually. I have white colleagues and white friends. I'm saying this for the 3rd time now. And we can't even find each other because even intellectually, it's always hovering around. It's always lingering.
Sure.
And it is also in their interest as white people, descendants of settlers and colonizers, to resolve this constitutional question. Even in the interest of their collaborators, the black pseudo-academics who hang around them and spew their triumphalist rhetoric. Even for them, resolving the question of who is human, resolving the question of property that was stolen will work for all of us. So constitutional critique is actually for the good of the country.
It is. I think another aspect before I come to, some other questions, built on the failure to properly narrate the horrors of the South African history and to paper over them in many ways, is a conception of justice, which is very, very vague, if present at all. So when I look through the text and I look through the Bill of Rights, clearly the text is centering dignity, equality, and freedom as these three. And immediately I'm thinking, I would have thought in our context and in our history, reparation and justice would have come first.
Absolutely.
And then I look at Section 25 within that chapter, and I look at the equality clause, which are supposed to be ways in which avenues for reparation. And I find this dancing where all we get is reverse discrimination. So justice becomes reverse discrimination.
Yeah.
So we're already calling justice discrimination.
Absolutely.
And I don't understand why, given the political balance of power at the time, we couldn't have created conceptions of reparation and justice in the Bill of Rights even, which were much more far-reaching.
You know, our elders, and this is my hypothesis, I think Bob Mandela imagined that in future there will be radical young people who will continue the struggle. So I don't think that Bob Mandela was as triumphant as we are told he is. And I think he understood the limitations of their time. At that time, the world was changing. The Soviet bloc, blah, blah, blah. You know that history.
Sure.
I'm not allowed to say blah, blah, blah.
No, please.
And so some concessions had to be made.
Sure.
So triumphalists, when they press on this constitution as being the best in the world, it's as if they imagine that the 1994 moment was the coming of Uhuru.
Was actually a culmination rather than a compromise.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it also goes to a different reading of history, how we read history differently, you know. But you mentioned Section 25, you know, and I said that the text, things that are in the text of the Constitution, are not really problematic, but others are, like Section 25.
Sure.
I said, if you have a society that is based on dispossession, I say to my students all the time, I say, your parents here, all of them are not staying right now where they were born. And it's not because they migrated or anything. As recent as the 60s and the 50s, even the 70s to a certain extent, there was dispossession of people's land. So it was not just the 1913 crisis or 1652 crisis. Periodically, you had white people arriving where black people are staying and removing them, telling them that we're going to bring a trolley. My parents tell me these stories even today. And they started telling me these stories when I started discussing my academic research with them. Also, which is, I think, sometimes the problem in our black families is that we don't discuss the politics we're supposed to discuss.
Sure.
Because I researched about these things and read them in books first. Only for them to say, you know, we were born at Lepelan, we were born Guano Palakhan, you know. And I asked them, what is Guano Palakhan called now? And it's called Fontaine or something Fontaine, you know. So we're in a system of dispossession. Then 1994 arrives and Section 25 is put in place. And for your viewers who have not read Section 25, it is a section in the Constitution that protects in the strongest terms private property. It says what you owned in 1994 is yours and nobody can do anything to it. If they want to do anything to that property, they will have to compensate you, they will have to talk to you, there would have to be this and that process. But it's so entrenched that what you owned in 1994, the Constitution says can't be taken arbitrarily. That's the language.
Yeah.
And that's an injustice. because what they owned in 1994 was stolen. So I agree with you. Equality and all of those nice things of the small p are very good, but some of them are dubious. And when we say this, they say, yeah, but the government should have fast-tracked the land reform and all of that. Where? When the land belongs to Van der Westhuizen and Labuschagne and Breed and whoever, and the Constitution protects it in the strongest terms, So when abolitionists say, for example, that the Constitution is not only a product of compromise, but it is there to cement ill-gotten gains of apartheid, they're correct. So that is where we are with the Constitution. And now we have the DA who are going to defend that, who are going to defend the status quo.
Yeah. I think one of the consequences that I can't escape of this coalition is that land reform, I think, can be kissed goodbye. Whatever land reform hopes there might have been, just forget it. This government will not be doing anything like that. And
the government of the ANC will now have an excuse. Will point to the DA. You say, what black people do when black people are on their own. They say, and I was laughing because I lost my old copy of Steve Biko, so I had to buy a new one. And what I do is, because it's a book that I always use for my scholarship, I underline those paragraphs that are important, so I don't read it again. Steve Biko says black people have a habit that when they're on their own, they say, hey, labelung bayasihlupa. And I think to myself how all of us, even now, when we're on our own, even the most liberal black people you can find who went to Model C schools, who went to, I won't mention the name of the school, I almost did.
Yeah, you'll end up embarrassing me very, very seriously.
Even those black people, when you sit with them at the stadium watching soccer and you just mingle, and you'll first start to engage with each other in English, and then you say something, Ndebele, my mother tongue is Ndebele, and you discover, good, no man, this person knows Ndebele, and you laugh, you drink. Part of that conversation will be, hey, basihlupa la belu.
The bayasihlupa conversation.
Yeah, hey, basihlupa man. Hey, umlungu ngamthembu, umlungu akasi-right. The ANC now will be doing that when they meet the EFF in corners. Will be doing that when they meet MK in corners. Because remember, these MK members were ANC members 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And whiteness will be throttling us. Because whiteness throttles. White people mustn't be afraid. Because whiteness is not a spirit, it's not a ghost. It's made up of white people. White people throttle us.
And you know what? In this moment, if we don't speak now, and we don't have these serious conversations now, then we may never be able to have them at some point. So speak.
No,
speak,
definitely. This is the time for us to speak and to not, our voices must not shake.
And they must be heard, actually.
Our friends, our cousins, our siblings who work in corporate daily complain about how whiteness is throttling them. They can't even speak properly when they speak to their white colleagues. Even a white colleague who's your junior, bayahlupheka bafowethu who are working in corporate. Now imagine how hard it's going to be now that Anneli Lodraet is the Deputy Speaker of Parliament. We might wake up next week and John Steenhuisen is the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa. And let's say Parliament impeaches Cyril Ramaphosa Cyril will now come to the black corner and say, but guys, Pella, if you're impeaching me, you are saying that John must be president. So we're in a very precarious position. We're in an extremely precarious position because of white people. And why? Because white people, at an individual level, some of them are very wonderful people. One of my mentors is a white person, a very nice guy. I think I wouldn't, he taught me how to write academic writing, So I wouldn't be writing to journals today. I might even write a book soon.
I hope so.
Because of things that I learned from him, But I mustn't mince my words in saying that he and his people are horrible people because they don't want to relinquish white privilege. They don't want to relinquish white supremacy. They precisely protect this constitution because it safeguards their privileged position in society. They talk to your white friends, if you have any, about reparations. And don't gloss over it over beers. Talk about it intensely every day for the whole week. You will hear who they are and what they think. So I think as black people, going back to Biko, Biko said that we must stop. Biko was very special, my brother. I think now personally where I teach, I prescribe him all the time.
Yeah, very important.
I think all of us must be talking about him. Biko says, and you see the difference between Biko and Fanon is that Fanon is a bit complex. Fanon was writing for an academic audience, for a scholarly audience. For people, it was an esoteric sort of thing. Biko was writing for anybody. Biko says, he paints a picture. He says, you see a black person goes to the toilet and sits there and curses the white person. Absolutely curses the white person. And Biko then insinuates that the white person knows that when the black person is in the toilet, he's cursing. But as soon as the black person leaves the toilet and goes to the white person, the language changes. I think really we can achieve a lot in this country if black people can start speaking those things that they say in the toilet or at the bar or at the stadium in the presence of white people. I am isolated as a black academic who writes and says these things. I'm not the only one. I know 2 or 3 other academics. Some people see us moving from one university to the next. They say it's because of better opportunities or want to stay next to the beach there, here in Cape. No. It's because you find yourself isolated by whiteness. And the black people who you are with there, when you are on your own, they say, yeah, no, but this is wrong. But when they get to faculty board, they're the ones who are supporting white nonsense. So we need to speak, even if it's to the detriment of our careers, even if we are afraid of sounding unscholarly, must speak honestly. In 2024, I said to him, I'm a Marxist. So I approach things from a class analysis, always, because of the ubiquity of class. But in 2024, we must raise our black consciousness above our class consciousness. Because in the next 5 years, your blackness is going to be what matters most in how you engage with the polity of South Africa.
Well, Dr. Sindane, as we conclude what has been quite the conversation, and I thank you. I really thank you for speaking what so many are thinking and are too afraid to say. You mentioned a book Tell us about your future plans. And like you say, I think Biko, and I'm with you. When you said Biko, I was like, of course, that's where we need to go now. Biko is important not only for shifting public conversations, and we forget how he was, never mind the violence that he suffered, but just the public criticism he suffered. Everyone pretends now they loved his writing.
Absolutely.
But he also makes an intellectual contribution to understanding the moment and future moments. So I'm wondering what your plans are in making that contribution. And do you see the book as falling within academia or within the public discourse, or maybe somewhere between the two?
Look, I think it should maybe be two books. And you. If I say this, I'll be very bold because I'll watch this on YouTube 5 years later,
exactly.
and I'll regret.
And everyone in the comments will be saying, we're still waiting
Where's
for the book.
The book's like when you're doing the PhD and people say,
exactly.
But I would want to, so my focus in my PhD was the theme of ancestors and the law. Idlozi nomthetho, you know. And I made an argument there that ancestral deference is a way of knowing. So it's an epistemic pattern, you know. And I then said that if the law does not reflect ancestral deference, then it is an incomplete law because it does not mirror the epistemic and ontological sensitivities of indigenous people. And I had 3 examiners, as you know, and we had a lot of banter during the examination process. But that banter was very helpful. And I think from that banter alone, I could produce something like a book. And that I would want to be scholarly because I don't want us to neglect the scholarly discourse.
Yeah.
But also, other than that, I would want to map decolonial critical legal studies. So you have someone like Joel Modiri who wrote about the jurisprudence of Biko.
Yeah.
And Lala who writes about the Azanian critical philosophical tradition, you know. So I would want to map the discourse.
Yeah.
And maybe find where some of these speak to each other. You have Madlingozi also, whom I have a lot of respect for.
Yeah, absolutely. He's still running away from an interview on this channel. I'm going to make sure that
It's difficult for him.
I think I must actually go to him.
It's difficult. We must watch his interview.
I saw it.
You saw his interview.
Yeah.
It was not a nice interview.
No, because apparently if you have any critique of the Constitution, you also can't be faithful to...
Yeah. They wanted him to apologize for his academic writing. Imagine since you write a paper and then you get your job interview and you are asked to apologize, you know. And I mean, he responded the way he responded. Maybe because he wanted the job. And had I been in his shoes, maybe I would have responded like him. But the first response that comes to my head is to say to those MPs that this is scholarly writing. Primarily, I'm writing for my peers. So it's not in a newspaper, it's for my peers, it's scholarly writing. If it was in quantum physics, you needed to be qualified in quantum physics for you to engage me on it. So I wrote a paper criticizing the Constitution in a scholarly journal. You, with all due respect as MPs, are not academics. You are not my peers. So you have no business wanting to make me apologize for this, you know. And it sounds very elitist, but that's just the way it is. As academics, we serve a specific purpose and function.
And our job is to criticize and to find loopholes and contradictions. It's not to be praise singers because otherwise stop all the scholarship now because everything is perfect.
I'm saying think of applied mathematics and quantum physics. Let's say Madlingozi was a professor of applied mathematics and he wrote a scathing critique. None of those MPs would have been qualified to critique him on it or to take him on pushback you know. But now they are saying what they are saying about the Constitution because they think it's general. So for me, those are some of the things in the constitutional discourse that are a problem. There are even people who write blogs, and I've got I'm not against blogs, who write blogs and who write non-fiction books, you know. I've got I read your book, I enjoyed it.
Some are better than others.
You know?
Yeah.
And they want to engage on scholarly critique of the Constitution. And I said this to my partner, I say, hey, I don't know why these people are being taken seriously in wanting to engage a scholarly critique using a blog, using a non-fiction book. You know, you can have the opinion you want to have, but the moment you engage scholars, at least subject yourself to scholarly rigor. I know I'm sounding, it sounds wrong what I'm saying, but, and then media houses invite them for interviews, and those people become experts on the Constitution. It's wrong.
Sure. Now you're getting me thinking about one other thing, which is media conversations about the Constitution, and how when a certain question comes up, before a court has even had a chance to decide a question, there's just a view that is absolute about the question that emerges in the media. And once again, I don't have a problem with people presenting their views, which sometimes the court ends up agreeing with. But I have a problem with the way that the media fails to curate constitutional debates, where, again, sophisticated constitutional questions get collapsed into only one side being. So for example, what you'll see is there's a case, it involves the EFF and the DA, let's say. And now the media is full of why the DA's side must be right and the EFF side must be wrong. And then the DA's heads will get leaked. DA says X. And then you're like, but aren't there two sides to this? What did the other side say? No, we don't know. All we know is DA said X, right? The way that constitutional debate gets collapsed into only one position getting the oxygen and the other position not getting that oxygen.
No, the media is a very satanic way of doing things. You know, Satan represents one thing and one thing only in biblical literature. And what do I mean when I say they have just one way of doing things, of saying things? You must check Jacob Zuma, for example. What was it called? What litigate? Somebody who litigates a lot. And there is such profound fatigue in the country of Jacob Zuma. And sometimes that fatigue seeps into the courts. And the media is what are the people who nestle or who incubate that fatigue. Because when Jacob Zuma takes a matter to court, any matter, it's the media who says, the narrative is, it's Zuma again.
Here we go again.
It's Zuma again. In a conversation with you when we were at Vets, I said to you that in the state capture issue, the merits of Zuma's case were worth listening to. But because all of us are so tired of Zuma, now it's dangerous it's fine if all of us are tired of Zuma, but it's dangerous when courts are tired of him. Because courts are not supposed to be tired or swayed by the media. I know we're running out of time, but your viewers will remember, Zuma says, Judge Zondo is my friend. And he doesn't leave it there. He says, Judge Zondo is my friend so much that he spoke at my wedding. He gave a speech. See, I'm not married yet. And I intend to do so. Then I invite you, Sizwe. If you come as a guest, it's okay.
Sure.
But if you are one of the groomsmen and you deliver a speech at my wedding, would it make sense for you later in life to be a judge in a matter where I am a subject? So none of us were willing to listen to Zuma. He even said, no. My ex-wife and his ex-girlfriend are sisters. We have children together with my ex-wife. He and the ex-girlfriend have children. Zuma even goes further. He says, when I was chairperson of the ANC in KZN, Zondo was a chairperson of one of the regions in KZN. So we also have a comradely relationship. So the man was well within his rights to ask for a recusal. But your famous legal journalists, the narrative you read, Zuma again, Zuma evading this, Zuma. I'm not saying it doesn't evade.
Sure. Yeah,
because it does.
Yeah.
It does.
But the legal questions and the questions of precedent which flow from those cases are supposed to last beyond the particularities of the litigants.
And the media is complicit in shaping how they are narrated, is complicit also in shaping how those issues affect
absolutely
the court.
And it's a way, and I'm not saying that the courts, and I don't want to be misread to be saying that the courts are so weak that they read the media and they just do what the media says, but it's a way of putting pressure on the courts to say that this is the conventional view. And if you find, for example, like the electoral court found for Zuma, expect
Pushback.
you're going to have to deal with pressure. So there's going to be an additional headache. And I just think it's unnecessary.
No, Sizwe, I'll say it without fear of error. And here my 3 law degrees must defend me.
I have none yet, so by all means.
My 3 law degrees must be the authority that I use to say this.
Yeah.
There's no such a thing as a neutral judge. Judges are not neutral. Maybe they can be impartial sometimes, but judges are not neutral. That's why when a judge goes to an interview at the Judicial Service Commission, those questions that Commissioner Malema asks, as a member of the public, are important questions for me. I want to know, if you are a judge, if you want to be a judge and you are being interviewed, I want to know, where were you in the riots of the mid-80s? Where were you? What were you doing? It matters to me because it speaks to how you approach a society. You know, I want to know, as somebody who's going to be a judge, what is your understanding of transformation? You know, white journalists, when I say white people are a problem, it's not whiteness that is a ghost, or white journalists go and say Commissioner Malema is personalizing things. What does this white journalists and their black friends, what does a judge's view about transformation have to do with their competency? Such profound stupidity. Because when you are a judge, you are going to preside over matters that have to do with transformation. We want to know what your position is on the Palestinian question. Because the Palestinian question is not a political question, it's an existential question. You know, we want to know that, so that in future, we can be able to ask you to recuse yourself. I don't know what judges, and I've asked my colleagues who are academics, what do you lose as a judge? What would have Zondo lost personally? We know the work of the commission might have suffered here and there, but what would Zondo have lost personally by saying, hey, Vanagiti, we are actually friends, you and I. Whether the friendship is good or bad. Yes, I spoke at your wedding. Yes, you were my chairperson in the province. Yes, we were girlfriends in the same home. Our children, in fact, if you've divorced your wife and I've broken up with my girlfriend, our children are first cousins to each other. Maybe let me recuse myself. You know? So judges, like I said, are not neutral. those of us who read court judgments for a living will tell you that even their tone is not neutral. In the recent Zuma matter with the Electoral Court, the Court said to the Electoral Court, how dare you question our authority? You know, so it was going to be fine if Zuma was sentenced by a magistrate's court, but it's not fine for us to do. How dare you? So that is so people must not think of the law as something that is outside of society, or something that is science, that is chemistry. No. It's a humanities subject. It's just given its own faculty because God knows why.
Well, Dr. Sindane, we could probably be here all day, but it's been fascinating to hear your thought, and thank you for advancing this debate, this conversation that we've been having with many legal scholars on the Constitution and its relation to society and vice versa. I think you've given us real food for thought, and you've spoken in ways that I think many need to hear at this time. And thank you for the great work that you do and for joining us on SMWX.
No, thank you very much. I was afraid of coming here because these days I just prefer writing. It's easy to speak and then you get misquoted. I prefer writing things down. But this was a lovely experience. Thank you for having me.
No, the pleasure is ours. So we look forward to the books.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Spread the fire. Thank you for joining us on SMWX. I'd also like to thank two companies that are part of this SMWX community who have really helped us on this Cape Town trip to bring you all the content we're going to bring you. The first company is Black Brick. They have accommodated the SMWX team and also given you this wonderful venue from which we're going to shoot some content when we're not at Parliament. So I'd really like to thank the people at Black Brick in Cape Town, but they're also in multiple places in South Africa. If you're ever looking for excellent accommodation, make sure you check out Black Brick. And I'd also like to thank the people at Lula who are helping to transport the SMWX crew as we bring you this coverage. Lula's a company that takes particularly crews and companies and workers, whether you're going to a festival or you have an off-site event where you're transporting lots of people. Lula gets you from A to B in a really seamless way. And I want to give a big shout out to Lula. Thank you for watching this channel. Thank you for continuing to build and grow this channel into an important, independent digital force in South African politics. And I think after this government is formed, we might just be that crucial counterweight, that crucial critical voice that our country very much needs. See you in the comments. Aye.